Okay, moving on to example 2. Solve and check the linear equation. We're going to follow those same basic steps. Now, if you ever, if you need to, if you don't remember your steps, have this piece of paper beside you with the steps. But eventually you've got to work towards not having anything with you when you work your problems other than your brain, a pencil, and a calculator. That you've got to work on all these problems repeatedly until you get the correct answer using only your brain. Students sometimes think that once they've done their homework once, good enough. But you need to work the problems over and over and over again until you can get them right without using any aids. When you're in My Lab Math, you've got View an Example. You've got to try not to use that. You've got to try not to use various apps. You've got to work these problems on your own until you can do them without any aids. That's the only way you're going to be able to work the problems on a test. But doing this problem here, following my basic steps, so the first thing I'm going to do is distribute that minus sign. So this becomes 2/3 minus 3x minus 7 equals 4x minus 1/2 plus 2x over 3. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clear my fractions by multiplying all terms on both sides by the common denominator. CD will always stand for common denominator, so I look at my denominators, I've got 3 and 2, so my common denominator is 6. And so I'm going to multiply everybody by 6. And it's really 6 over 1 that you're lining up with the numerators. So on this first term here, this 3 and the 6 are going to cancel, leaving 2. And so I've got 2 times 2 for 4. On the next one, again, you're canceling denominators, so nothing cancels here. 3 times 6 for 18. Common mistake would to cancel those guys anyway, but that's why I said it was 6 over 1. It's denominators that are canceling. Then 6 times 7 minus 42 equals 6 times 4, 24x. Cancel here, the 2 and the 6 cancel, leaving 3. 3 times negative 1, negative 3. And canceling on the end, the 3 and the 6 cancel, leaving 2. 2 times 2x, 4x. That's the best way to handle fractions. Clear them. Some students will try to do the problems with the fractions in place, and that's just the hardest way you can do the problem. Clear those fractions by multiplying every term on both sides by the common denominator. Now let's collect like terms. 4 minus 42 is, just lost my train of thought, negative 38x. Then 24x plus 4x for 28x minus 3. Get those x's together and solve negative 46x minus 38 equals negative 3. And then add 38 to both sides. Negative 46x equals 35. And then divide by that negative 46. And I get x equals negative 35/46. And that doesn't simplify, and that's the answer I want. Don't give me decimals unless I give you decimals. That's the answer. And when you're doing your homework in the computer, it'll usually say how they want the answer. And so if they say a simplified fraction, you give them a simplified fraction. On the rare occasion when they say give them a decimal, you give them a decimal. Now, a good hint as far as how does the computer want the answer, this is one good thing about View an Example. Click through View an Example, and then however they answer the question, the format they use to answer the question is the format you should use to answer the question. But in general, try not to use View an Example. Try to work these problems completely and totally on your own. Okay, checking. Now we're going to check it the same way you did before, but if we get to the next page, I actually have all those steps written out. That we're going to move all the terms to one side like we did before, press the y equals, type it in there, and this x-intercept should match. And so I did that, it's all typed out here. But there I put it in there, get it all to one side, put it into y equals, and then you graph it. And there's a graph that I get, and we said that the answer was negative 3546, which was roughly negative 7.67. And if I look at that picture there, and I should have really blown up the picture, so we will zoom in on the picture a little bit. We said the answer is roughly, you can't see it at the top of the page there, we can see it at the top of the page now, negative 7.6. And if I look at this picture here, right above my blue pen there is negative 1. And so it seems reasonable that the x-intercept might be negative 7.6, so I would feel good about this answer. And so you can always check these things graphically. Zoom back out a little bit. And then all the steps of how to check things graphically are written there. So those were linear equations. And one thing I should say about the linear equations, reason why it's a linear equation, look at the graph. The graph is a line. So that's why they call it a linear equation. Moving on. The other topic in this section, rational equations. A rational equation is an equation that has a variable in the denominator. Before we discuss how to solve rational equations, consider the following. Suppose we are given this equation, and then suppose we were told that 2 was an answer to that equation. Now, the old-fashioned way to check, we're checking now using our graphing calculator. But before, like people like me, old people, when we had to check our answers, we just plugged our answer into the equation, and we wanted that equation to work. So if we check it the old-fashioned way, so there's my original equation, and then I was told the answer was 2. So I replace all the x's with 2's and see what I get, and we get a problem right here. I get 5 over 0 and negative 25 over 0. We always say over, but it really means division. That means 5 divided by 0, negative 25 divided by 0. And the next line, recall division by 0. A 0 in the denominators is always undefined. Division by 0. A 0 in the denominator is always undefined. And so when I said x equal 2 and x equal 2 resulted in an undefined expression, it couldn't have been an answer. Your solutions, your answers have to give us expressions that are true, are defined. And so x equal 2 was not an answer. Now in this case, if we go back and we look up here, putting 2 right in there would give me division by 0, very, very bad. Any number that causes the denominator to be 0, we're going to call a restriction. And so that's what we have right here. A restriction is any number that causes the denominator to become equal to 0. You may never accept a restriction as a solution to an equation. And so that is very important, that a restriction is any number that causes division by 0, and we can never, ever, ever accept restrictions as answers. Now, if you happen to do a problem and you've done your algebra correctly, but you got a restriction you got a restriction in the end, then you're going to say that the equation has no solution. Okay, steps to solving rational equations. And they're going to be very similar to what we've already done. But we're going to put that restriction thing in there. 1, note any restrictions. Recall, restrictions may never be accepted as a solution. And again, a restriction is any number that causes the denominator to become equal to 0. That's what a restriction is. Then the steps are going to be basically the same. Clear the parentheses, clear the fractions by multiplying all terms of both sides by the common denominator, factor denominators first. Again, factoring is one of those skills that we hope you bring to the class. 4, simplify left and right sides of the equation, combining like terms. 5, get the variable on one side. 6, add or subtract as necessary. 7, divide both sides of the equation by the coefficient of the variable. And then 8, check. Not optional. On the first two problems, that was just a nicety. But we saw in the first one, I'd made a small mistake, and then when I checked it, I caught the mistake. You've got to check here. You must at least make sure that your proposed solution is not a restriction. Maybe you won't have time to check the whole thing, but you've at least got to compare your answer to the restrictions. Okay, we'll end this video here and then pick up with the problem in the next video.